Is it worth modding your miter saw with fancy blades and zero clearance insert plates if you're a DIYer or weekend shedster like me? And is it as easy as they make it look? I'm going to find out. My name's Adam and welcome to my YouTube channel. Hello and welcome back to the shed. So today I'm giving the miter saw a bit of a service and adding some mods to it that YouTube tells me will improve its performance. I'm going to upgrade the blade to improve cut quality. I'm going to make a zero clearance insert plate to reduce tear out. I'm going to calibrate it all to 90 degrees with an engineer's square to make sure that it's cutting as it should. Finally, I'm going to calibrate the laser to make sure that I'm getting consistent cuts every time where I measure. The thing is though, I'm not convinced that all that stuff's going to make that much of a difference, and I'm not convinced that it's as easy as everyone on YouTube makes it look. It doesn't feel that simple to me, so I'm going to film all of this stuff for you and let you know how easy or hard in reality it is. So before I get into that, let's do some benchmark cuts to see what the tear out and the cut quality and the squareness is like before, and we'll do an after as well. So I'm going to use some MDF, some ply, and a bit of walnut, which is really expensive. Things I do for YouTube. Right then, so here is the MDF. It's not that bad, you know. Really no tear out on it. It's actually pretty square too. Plywood, bit of tear out on that, look, you can see. And the walnut, which probably just cost me about 50 quid. Very little tear out on that either. See, it's not that bad, you know. That's why I'm cynical about these upgrades. Is it really going to make a difference? So there we go. There's the benchmarks. First job now is to change the blade. So with the saw unplugged, which is really important, I'm going to swap this, I think it's a 24 tooth blade, out for this 48 tooth Freud blade. The idea being that the more teeth, the smoother the cut and therefore the better quality. And the reason I'm doing this first, before kind of squaring everything up, is that I want to square everything to this new blade rather than square it to this one first and then have to start again when I change the blade out. So I read the instruction manual. This should be simple. All I have to do is swing this up, undo that bolt there to swing this plate out the way. Then I'll have access to that 13mm bolt. I've got to undo that by turning it clockwise apparently. And there's a little blade stop here that will lock it into place. I'm sure all miter saws have this, but it comes with a wrench that will undo the blade for me. Right then, that's the blade done, and in the grand scheme of things that was pretty easy. A couple of bolts and you're pretty much done. You just got to make sure that this is all lined up. It's a little bit difficult to get the bolt off, and I was a little bit wary of cutting myself on these blades, so just watch out for that if you're doing it. But simple job. Now that the blade is on, the next job is to square this up vertically to this bed. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. The first way is by using one of these, an engineering square, and it's just a case of placing it on the bed and then bringing the blade down and kind of eyeballing if it's 90 degrees. I can see here that this is already slightly out to the right, but there is another way, and I have one of these. This is a digital angle finder. So rather than kind of crudely eyeballing this with the engineer's square, what I'm going to do is reference 0 on the bed with this and then pop it on the blade like so. It's magnetic, so it will just stick, and then make sure that the blade's at 90 that way. So the first job is to adjust this little handle here, which then should allow the saw to move side to side like that. And then there's a little like stop bolt here that if you turn that, use my thumbs, that goes up and down, and then that should adjust the vertical of the mitre saw. So that's the blade calibrated to 90 vertically. Another easy job to do. And feels really good. It's a bit like cleaning your workshop, having a spring clean. It's just nice to know that it's done. So with that said, the next job is to make the zero clearance insert plate. Now all mitre saws come with a standard throat plate that looks something like this one, and you'll notice that it's got a large gap in the middle. And that's for versatility, right? You can make various different angled cuts through this without having to worry about it. So if you do a lot of bevels, are these called bevels or mitres? But if you twist the saw this way, you can come through at an angle and it won't catch the throat plate. You can do it vertically, etc., etc. But I don't do a lot of this, right? So I don't need that large gap, and it also presents a number of drawbacks. The first one is tear out. So the large gap means that when you've got a piece of wood on here, the fibres aren't supported. So as you cut it, you get tear out, those little things that you saw hanging off when I showed you the benchmarks. So a zero clearance insert plate should solve that problem by having no gap, more surface area for the wood fibres to rest on as it's being cut, and therefore less or no tear out, hopefully. The second downside to such a large gap is small pieces of wood falling through it, as you can see, which is annoying firstly, but also could be a little bit dangerous. These could fly out if they get caught by the blade, I guess. So again, a zero clearance insert plate should solve that, because there won't be a gap for any of these little bits of wood to fall into. The third downside that I'm hoping it will solve, although it's a bit of a stretch, is dust collection. So it makes sense in my primitive mind that the large gap must be letting dust escape when I'm cutting the wood up, and dust collection on these mitre saws is poor anyway. So I think that having no gap or less of a gap should direct more dust into the dust extraction port and result in less tidying up for me. So with that said, I now need to take this insert off, and it comes in two separate parts. So I might use this as a template to draw around on the new piece of wood that I'm going to make it out of, and also to map the screw holes. So to keep it all together in its current form with all its current dimensions, I'm going to use some blue tape, stick these two parts together before I take it out, and therefore when I take it off it should remain in its current state, and I can draw around it and map these screws if I need to. I've now got to choose a piece of wood that will fit. It will be the same depth as this, so it will fit into the slot. So my options are this bit of 6.5mm thick MDF, but it's MDF and I'm not a fan, and I don't want to look at MDF every time I cut something on the mitre saw, so MDF's off the team. The next thing I could use, loads of people use this, is plywood. I've only got 18mm and 12mm plywood lying around, and I don't know how you thickness plywood down to 6.5mm because of its layers. I don't know whether that would work. You tell me in the comments if it would or not. But plywood, for that reason, is off the team. So, carrying on the expensive walnut theme, it just so happens that I have an offcut of walnut here from a hobby pack I bought from Surrey Timbers last year, and it is just purely by coincidence exactly the right width for this throat plate. It's probably just a little bit over. So in the interests of being completely ostentatious and indulgent, I'm going to make my zero clearance insert plate out of walnut. Cutting it to the right dimensions this way will be fine. I just literally need to cut it to length, and then round the corners off. The thickness this way is the issue, so I'm going to run this, when it's cut to size, I'm going to run it through the table saw to get it as close to 6.4mm as I can, and then I'll do some sanding to make sure that it's the right thickness. Now would be an excellent time to point out the benefits of locking your fence before you start making a cut. Otherwise it moves, like this. Okay, that did not go according to plan because I didn't lock off the fence. So it moved when I was cutting the walnut, and so now I've got effectively two wedge-shaped pieces of walnut. It's not the end of the world, but they're going to need a bit of work before they'll fit in the Mitre saw gap. And here it is in all its glory, a walnut zero clearance insert plate, very posh, complete with also custom screws now, because I had to file the tops down because they were sticking out over the surface ever so slightly. I hadn't inset them enough. So rather than re-drilling the holes, I just took a file to the top and filed them down a bit. You'll also notice how far that laser line is away from the cut line. So that will be my next job after a quick recap. So quick recap on how kind of easy or hard that was. It should have been a fairly easy job, made more difficult through user error. Obviously, me not locking the fence completely cocked that cut up, and I had to add a step or two into the process to make it right again. But happy with how this turned out. Custom bolts as well, and with that kind of cut in the plate, now it's looking really cool. I have also adjusted the laser, and I did that off camera because lasers are bad for cameras. And it's a good job I did because it's a really tricky job. So a bit of info for you if you're thinking about doing this and you've got a laser. There's a cover here that comes off. On either side there are two screws. You turn the right side clockwise to move the laser that way, and then conversely you turn the left side clockwise to move it this way. So basically you're shimmying it left or right. It was a tricky job actually to calibrate it. Go easy, go like quarter half turns if you're adjusting your laser. The laser is calibrated to this left line here, so it should now in future be always where the left edge of the blade is, which should give me consistent cuts against where I've measured. Not a fan of lasers. This thing I think is going to move as and when this saw kind of gets going. If you're going to buy a Mitre saw, buy one with a shadow cut. Yeah, better than lasers. Okay, so last job of this project is to put the fence back on and then square it up. So I'm just going to dust it off and then put the 4 bolts in that hold it together, and then I'll square it up with an engineer's square. Okay, so to get the fence 90 degrees to the cut, I'm going to use this big engineer's square here. So with the engineer's square, as square as I can eyeball it to the zero clearance insert plate cut, I'm actually going to lower the blade now and use that as a reference, making sure that the teeth are all in the plate so they're not skewing the engineer's square. And then I'll tighten the fence up. Okay, so that's about as close as I can get it eyeballing it. I'm going to make a test cut now, and we'll measure how square that is. Hopefully it'll be fine. If not, we can tinker with it. So no tinkering needed. This is about as square as I could ever hope it to be. So job done. Okay then, time for the before and after. So we had MDF, plywood and walnut. Here is the MDF. Feels about the same, but then I don't think you'd get tear out with MDF anyway, would you? Because it's like all glued together. Felt nice when it was going through it though, it felt smoother. Here is the plywood. Now, still a bit of tear out on that plywood, although interestingly, it was on the top surface as the blade hits it, not on the bottom. The bottom, this side here, perfectly smooth, no tear out whatsoever. So that zero clearance insert plate is working. And lastly, the walnut. Which side did I cut? This side. There is a noticeable difference. If you remember, I'll put a side by side up, but there was a little bit of tear out on one of these sides. But this one has no tear out whatsoever. And it also felt really nice when that blade was going through it. Again, smooth like butter. Okay, final thoughts. So, is it worth modding your Mitre saw, and is it as easy as they make it look on YouTube? So the answer to the first part, in my view, is yes, I think it is worth modding your Mitre saw. This feels nicer to use now. I love the walnut zero clearance insert plate, and knowing that my fence is square and it's cutting vertically 90 is just really reassuring. It's a little bit like when you have your car serviced, you just know that everything is in its rightful place and it's working as it should. I also love the new blade. It feels a lot smoother when it's cutting. Making these mods reminds me of when I had my first car back in 1997. It was a red Metro GTA. And as soon as I bought it, I whacked a great big exhaust on the back, so it sounded ridiculous actually, but the joy I got from that at those times was immense. And it's the same with this. I love looking at the walnut plate, I love looking at the red blade, I love how it feels when I'm making the cuts. It just feels a little bit smoother. I feel like I've made it better. So in that sense, yes, I think it's worth it. The results are kind of minimal. You're not going to turn into the wood whisperer overnight just because you put a new blade or a zero clearance insert plate on your Mitre saw, but it does make it feel nicer to use. Is it as easy as they make it look on YouTube? No, absolutely not. Forget the mistakes I made with not setting my fence. Some of this is just fiddly, like getting the fence 90. I had to undo these bolts several times. I had to kind of jig it about. I had to eyeball it for 4 or 5 minutes with the engineer's square. Lots of the videos you see on YouTube that are advising you how to make these mods are, I think, quite heavily edited, and that's all good. But in reality, you're probably going to spend a good 2 or 3 hours doing this stuff if you don't know your Mitre saw very well. And I didn't. I was filming this, so it took me a bit longer. If you know your Mitre saw inside out and you've done this before, then obviously you'll know you could probably do all this in an hour and a bit, I expect. But be prepared. If you're new to this and not done it before, you're going to have to invest a couple of hours at least in doing all this stuff. So there you go. Modding your Mitre saw is like modding your first car back in the 90s. It might not do all that much, but it just feels nice. And on that note, I'll see you in the next video.